Hi, it's Gary Chimes from Lake Washington Sports and Spine, and I want to talk about the virtue of telemedicine. When my partner Garrett Hyman and I first started doing telemedicine on March 17th, 2020, in the early days of the pandemic, we were doing it out of necessity. But now that we're over a year and a half into the transition, to my surprise, I'm actually finding that telemedicine is superior to the in-office clinic visit. And I'm surprised by this, and I think many people will be. But I think there's a few reasons why that's true. I think one of them is to think about the construction of office visits as they exist, where people go into the clinic for an office visit. And I think we've been doing that for so long, it's been true for, let's say, 50 to 100 years, that we forget that actually shouldn't be the default. Historically, what were doctor visits? They were house calls where someone would take their bag and go to the clinic, the person's home, and see them in their real environment. And the transition from the home visit to the office visit wasn't based on the patient's needs, it was based on the doctor's needs of having the clinic set up as a construct. And there's a lot of inconveniences that are associated with that. But the telemedicine visit is a much closer approximation to the ideal, which is the home visit. We're getting to see people in their home environment. And that's even more true now in this day and age of technology because we're actually interfacing with them through their computer system in the same way that they are now working for the people who are working at home on their computers. And you'll see things like people looking at the screen this way or having kind of like a suboptimal ergonomic environment. We're getting to see them in that real world. And there's an intimacy there that is really been missing from medicine for a really long time. A second reason I think that the telemedicine visit is really helpful is one of the things about the construction about medical visits that's odd is in almost any other form of consultation, you separate the get to know you visit from the getting down to business visit. Like if you hire a contractor to rebuild your home, you don't really get into the nitty gritty of the construction on the first encounter. You just meet the person, get a sense of how they communicate, whether it's a good fit for you. That's true for like working with a wedding planner or an attorney or an accountant. That's been skipped in the medical environment. And I find that sometimes people who are not traditional medicine practitioners but are alternative medicine, they actually have that separation. And it's something that people need emotionally. And it's always been a limiting factor in the way that we've practiced medicine. And I find that the telemedicine actually it allows for that, which I think is helpful. Uh, Now, a third thing is that the way I'm practicing telemedicine now at the end of 2021 is different than how I practiced it in early 2020. I've learned how to adjust, like things like using a whiteboard. And I guess in theory, I could use a whiteboard in the office, but we're not really set up for that. And I can draw things on paper, which I do. But I find having the whiteboard as a tool where I can kind of go through the biomechanics of the shoulder or the different subtypes of knee osteoarthritis, that's very helpful. In particular, I'm literally drawing, and that slows me down because I understand labral pathology or supraspinatus tendinosis very quickly. But anything that can kind of slow me down so I'm processing information at the same cadence the patient is really helps it to be a more thorough visit. There's other aspects, like in my particular case, my home office is adjacent to the home gym. So if I need to demonstrate how to use a kettlebell, how to do a step up lunge onto a box, or how to use suspension straps, I can literally show the patient. It's just a much more fluid environment. All these things I think provide for, it's not just an alternative care, I actually think it's better care. And I think it's in truth, I think if we're designing the medical system from the ground up and we didn't have this presumption of the superiority of in-clinic visits, I don't think that that's where we ever would have started. Now, of course, there are things that need to be done in clinic, like when I do procedures. If I'm doing an ultrasound guided procedure, I have that equipment at the office. If I need to do a nerve study, I'm doing that in the office. If I need to do a diagnostic ultrasound, I'm doing that in the office. But I think that we're not finding that this causes delays because I can get people into telemedicine so quickly. So the time they're getting the procedure, it's just not as overwhelming. I just used to have these cases where, I'd see people for 45 minutes, which is a pretty generous new patient appointment. And I would try to combine getting to know them, doing a medical history, doing a physical exam, do a diagnostic ultrasound, and doing a ultrasound guided procedure all in one visit. was just overwhelming. And even though people often felt better, like they might be feeling like their shoulder pain or their knee pain or their ankle pain or hip pain was gone, what they mostly processed was just how overwhelming the experience was. So I think that having this opportunity to have the intimate virtual house call, get to know the person, be able to kind of work through the understanding of the anatomy, how it affects things from an exercise standpoint, being able to do that in what is essentially a simulated house call, I just think it actually is better. I recognize that's not the case for everybody. I recognize not all doctors can do this. Not everybody's a mid-career physician in an area where there's a high density of good Wi-Fi connections. But for many people, it really is a better choice. And I'm as surprised by this as everybody else is, but I actually think it is better. So this is Gary Chimes, along with my partner Garrett Hyman at Lake Washington Sports and Spine. Thanks.